Okay, I'm fresh back from the wilds of winter in Eastern Europe, where I was visiting my wife Magamaya's family and ancestral roots. My kids were digging in, and whilst I was there, it was my first time in Eastern Europe in winter. And so for me, in addition to visiting the sites where there were the healing waters, and they've got a lot of sacred healing waters in that part of the world, I also wanted to go on a mission for mistletoe. And here it is. This is gathered from up just below the border of Ukraine, right on the edge there. And it brings me such joy to have been able to harvest this plant, because living in a subtropical region of Australia, I don't have access to mistletoe. And so going into winter, going into its heartland and being able to gather this with all the magic that's behind it, I can't express the joy that it's brought me and the sense of sanctity that I have for this. So I'm going to unfold for you as best I can. First, the lore surrounding mistletoe, because the medicine is in the lore. The lore is medicine, right? There's no separation between herbs and herb lore, the medicinal properties, the chemistry, and the medicine and magic of the lore, right? L-O-R-E. And so I'm going to share first mistletoe lore. For me, my journey with mistletoe lore started with Asterix and Obelix. And Asterix and Obelix, if you read those cartoons as a kid, they were French. There's druids in them. And the chief druid, Getafix, was always off gathering mistletoe with a golden sickle from the great forests, from the oak trees, to make his magical potion. And like so much in Asterix and Obelix, it's actually rooted in history. And so I'm going to start by sharing the Celtic lore before I move on to some of the Nordic lore. So settle in. So the stories that we have around mistletoe. First, I guess the thing that you need to know first is that mistletoe isn't a tree or a shrub or anything like that. It grows in the boughs of other trees, right? And if you try and get it and plant it in your garden, it won't grow. In fact, it's very, very hard to cultivate. Traditionally, they thought because when all of Europe is white, right? When the great wolf, Fenrir, has swallowed the sun, and all the trees, except for the pines, but all the rest of the trees are all stark and bare, and the world is white, then there's this glowing, verdant, green fire, these boughs up in the forest, right, that are still retaining their vitality. When there's no life around to be seen in so many ways, these things are shining and glowing up there in the trees. And so that stands out. Their medicine power is embodied and represented in that image, right? And having seen that image myself, I could really feel it, dead boughs, dead trees, or stark leafless trees. All the life has gone down into the underworld below the snow and into the roots. And there's mistletoe. There, right? A promise of life to return. And so this was the case for the Celts. They had the same experience. And I'll read, I think, the oldest passage that we've got, at least that I'm familiar with, about the Druidic use of mistletoe. And it's by Pliny the Elder, a famous Roman author from the 1st century. And he wrote, "The Druids, for that is what they call their magicians, hold nothing more sacred than the mistletoe, and on a tree which it is growing, provided especially that it is an oak tree. Mistletoe is rare, and when found it is gathered with great ceremony, particularly on the 6th day of the moon, hailing the moon in a native word that means healing all things. They prepare a ritual sacrifice and banquet beneath the tree, and they bring up 2 white bulls, whose horns are bound for the first time on this occasion. A priest arrayed in white vestments climbs the tree and with a golden sickle cuts down the mistletoe, which is caught in a white cloak. Then finally, they kill the bulls, offering them as sacrifice and praying to their God to render his gift propitious to those on whom it is bestowed. They believe that mistletoe, given in a drink, will impart fertility to any animal that is barren, and that it is an antidote to all poison. So, how do they arrive at this? It's beautiful how I believe that they arrived at this. Remember, the world is dead when mistletoe is alive, right? And it is often found and is most sacred when it's in an oak tree. And because oak trees are the largest and oldest trees in most of these forests, then they're also the trees that are struck most frequently by lightning. And so because mistletoe wouldn't grow on the ground in any way, right? These days we understand it grows through bird droppings, dropping the seeds up in the boughs. But because mistletoe wouldn't grow on the ground and couldn't be transplanted in this way, and the oak tree where it was most often found was most often struck by lightning, and because it was alive when everything else was dead, then they believed that mistletoe was sown in the tree by lightning. Or if they didn't believe that, they said that to demonstrate its power, right? Maybe they didn't believe it, they said that, right? So mistletoe appears in an oak tree. And what is oak? Oak is the biggest, hardiest, oldest, strongest, most sacred wood and tree of the forest. And therefore, whose tree is it? It's God's tree. It's Thor's tree. It's the lightning thrower's tree. It is declared, it's the God owns it by throwing lightning at the tree and says, this is mine. This is sacred to me. And then, so this big phallic tree of the oak that is owned by the lightning god, the thunderer, right? Then these boughs, these great circular orbs of green inside this tree, were intimately associated with lightning, which is the sperm of the gods. It's the ejaculate of Zeus thrown down upon the earth, fertilizing the earth into the fertile womb of the earth. And it fixes nitrogen and actually does increase fertility in the earth, right? It has these wonderful effects on crops. And so with this sense, then these big balls, these boughs of green that grow there came to be seen like the god's balls, like Thor's balls, right? Because they're so virile that they're alive when everything else is dead, right? And so this is some of the imagery that's around this, right? This is the sense of the time, the season, the place, imagine you saw that tree struck by lightning, and then later that year you saw this miracle green that grows in the tree, right? In the dead of winter when everything is gone. And so whilst something we have to understand is that whilst rain dances were a common thing for people in some areas of the New World, the Americas, and for a whole bunch of areas in Africa, because it doesn't bloody rain, in the Celtic world and so much of Europe, it's like there's not a shortage of rain. The shamans, the Druids, didn't do rain dances, right? What did they do? They had to do rituals instead to bring back light. Not to bring back rain, because the rain is constant, but bring back light in the depths of winter. And the further north you go, the more important this is. And so the Druids would go out in the middle of winter at Christmas time, right? At Christmas time, that when this bough was there, and yes, you remember mistletoe and Christmas, it continues to this day. They would go out on the darkest night, right? When all hope feels fled. It's just like, we're running out of food. We're running out of firewood. we've got nothing more in our cellars, right? In our, if they didn't eat, maybe they didn't have cellars, we're running out. And the days are getting shorter and shorter, and the nights are getting longer and darker and colder. Can we make it through? And at that time, the shamans would go, the druids would go, the magicians would go, and they would make rituals to bring back the light, of hope in their community, one could say socially, right? But to perform their equivalent of a rain dance, to call forth the light. And central, because to call forth the light is to call forth the spring, right? Because spring is what ends the winter, right? So here we have this symbol of spring, this promise, this green fire in the boughs of the oak tree. And so it was gathered with great reverence and seen as a fertility tonic that could make any barren animal fertile, and also as the antidote to all poisons, right? And so when I read Asterix and Obelix and I read about Getafix and the magic potion, it wasn't too far wrong. It wasn't too far wrong because those guys were reading those books. So we've got this deep association, and then after that, then a virile and fertile youth, like a maiden or a kouros, a boy, like someone young and fertile, would go around with a bough, right? Or with a sprig, right? A sacred sprig, and go around to people and, you know, in the equivalent of, have you heard the good word? The Lord has risen. You know, it says, have you heard the good word? You know, the mistletoe has been harvested. The winter is ending. The green life and light is returning. Take hope, people. Take hope. It's coming back. And they would go around with this sprig. When would they do that? Between December 22nd and December 25th. Christmas time. That's when the mistletoe was harvested and was taken around like this. And that's where, though, I want to jump traditions. Do I want to jump traditions now? Yeah, I want to jump traditions now. And in Norse mythology, where they've got all the same kind of, they don't do rain dances up there either, they've also got stories about mistletoe. And the story about mistletoe that they have is about the god Baldir. And the god Baldir has had premonitions of his death. And he tells Freya, or Freya, who Friday is named after, a goddess of love and things like this, tells Freya about his premonitions. And Freya works a magical incantation and blessing so that Baldir may not be harmed. And she makes this incantation, this prayer, that he will not be harmed by anything of the earth or anything of the sky. He will not be harmed by anything that is winged or anything that is furred. He will not be harmed by fire or neither by ice. He will not be harmed by weapon nor by magic. There's all of these things that are woven into this charm, you know? And that's how a lot of these things go. Not this and not that. Neither by this and neither by that. Neither by day neither by night, right? There's a traditional syntax to this non-ordinary and magical language that was used. And so she makes this powerful goddess. And then all the other gods come around to see if it worked. And so they line Baldir up and they start throwing spears at him and shooting arrows at him and throwing fire at him and trying to freeze him and setting bears on him, and nothing works. And he can't be killed, and they're just having a great old time. They're like, wow, check this out. This is, you know, they try it at night, and they try it in the day, they try it in the morning, they try it at the night, And then Loki, the trickster god, right? The kind of Hermes of the Vikings, disguises himself as an old woman and comes up to Freya and says, did you really get everything into this magical incantation? And she said, yeah, I got everything. She said, all except mistletoe, because it seems so harmless. it's also not of the earth and not of the sky, right? And it's a sort of in-between thing in its own right as well, I think. And then Lockie, hearing this, then somehow crafts an arrow or a dart out of a branch of mistletoe and sneaks it into the quiver of one of the other gods, who shoot it at Baldir, and he's killed. And as soon as he's killed, then winter falls upon the earth. It's a bit like when Persephone is abducted, right? And the crops won't come again. And so winter descends, and so there's this association with winter. And then Freya, in her anger and outrage and grief, determines that that from here on in, mistletoe will never ever be associated with violence again, and everyone that passes under a bough of mistletoe should receive not an arrow or a sword or a flames or ice or bare teeth or any of this, but a kiss. A kiss. And it became a symbol of peace to the Norse. And I've read elsewhere that that war could not be waged underneath mistletoe as well. So it became like international waters, sacred space, right? A place of armistice, a place where treaties could be made underneath that. And so that kiss, when maybe you've had a kiss under mistletoe. Maybe you've seen mistletoe hanging by a Christmas tree, which is also a pagan symbol from that time, used to call forth the light in the middle of the darkest days, right? That's another story. And this law comes through to us today, hidden and broken and in bits and pieces that no longer make sense. But as a symbol of peace, it was to the Norse. But as a promise of hope to the Celts, of life, of green, verdant life, right? And so because of that, I after I harvested mistletoe, I went the extra miles actually to the Ukraine border and took a bough of mistletoe and deposited it on the border of the Ukraine and Slovakia, and offered my prayers for peace. And I left it there just as a magical incantation and prayer. And it felt beautiful. It felt very beautiful. So so that's the law that I'm familiar with. There's more of it. There's so much more of it. But let's move into a little of the medicine as well. And so from a herbal medicine perspective, all of that lore is medicine. And this herb can be used for fertility and for prayers for peace and for all of those things. It creates a safe space. All that stuff is medicine. I'm not putting a line in the sand between phytochemistry and mythology here, right? It's all medicine. Everything is medicine. Oh, look at it catching the light. Yeah. There's also before we had Joseph Campbell in the 19th century, we had Fraser, and Fraser wrote a book called The Golden Bough. And the Golden Bough references a myth from Virgil, one of the Roman poets, about someone who gets their witch or their sibyl to present a golden bough at the gates of Hades so that they may pass through. And that golden bough is thought to be mistletoe, because as it fades, it turns this glorious yellow, right? But in the light here, there's a sort of green golden quality to it as well, the golden bough. So mistletoe is a herb that can be used outside of this context, and it was still used. It is still used. It's not used by Australian herbalists, I have to say. It's used, the only way it's really used and its law continues that I'm familiar with, that I encounter, is as an anti-cancer medicine. And that comes through anthroposophical medicine, and that comes through Rudolf Steiner. So it's, I'm not aware of it having greater antiquity than Steiner. I think it could have been one of Steiner's spiritual insights. And that's through his sense of the doctrine of signatures, where it's seen as parasitic like cancer. And so it's used, and that's how he arrived at that. Now, anthroposophical doctors say that it's very effective in that regard. And so although I can't see, it was seen traditionally not as a parasite, but as growing out of, like a child, like sprouting from the tree. Not, the parasitic notion is a modern notion. So I don't like the mythology that Steiner is sharing in that regard, but it's used still today in anthroposophical medicine for cancer. And so that's the only way I see it rocking up. But it actually has a whole bunch of uses. Now, in high enough doses, mistletoe can produce alterations in consciousness, seizures, headaches, collapse, changes in cardiovascular, not the berries, at least not European. There's a myth that the berries are poisonous. European mistletoe, the berries aren't poisonous. They're little spermatic little white berries, which fits with the whole God's jizz, Thor's balls kind of thing, you know. But there are American mistletoes that have poisonous berries, and there may be there's Australian mistletoes, and maybe some of those have poisonous berries. European doesn't. But in high enough doses, it still produces all of these intense effects, right? Really, really intense. And so in therapeutic doses, it has a strong action upon the central nervous system and the cardiovascular system. And the eclectics in America predominantly at the beginning of the 20th century were well versed in it. Homeopaths to this day will still use it as a minor medicine, but the eclectics lent on it. I wouldn't say it's a major medicine, but it was a well-known medicine. It wasn't tucked away. And so Viscum album is its name, and the eclectics used it for a range of things. One of the things that was used in, not for fertility, but for childbirth, they used it. And so it has, in therapeutic doses, it has these relaxing, antispasmodic, blood pressure lowering, stress reducing, spasm reducing qualities. If you really push those doses up too high, it's going to do the opposite of all of that. And I don't mean like homeopathic doses, I just mean not too high doses, like medium doses. And so it has all of those effects. Let me read, I've got Ellingwood here, Hallowed be thy name, and I'm going to read a couple of bits from Ellingwood so that we can hear what he had to say. So, physiological action, several cases of poisoning after eating the leaves are on record, produces vomiting, prostration, coma, contraction of the pupil with muscle spasm, produces tenesmus, spasm, bloody stools, convulsion, emesis, vomiting, catharsis, and death. In its influence upon the cerebral circulation, upon the womb and reproductive function, it acts similarly to ergot, a famous medicine of the time. We'll get to that. The specific indications, according to Ellingwood and the eclectics, is it is indicated where there is a flow of blood to the brain, headache and stuff, frequent headache and flushing of the face, in hysteria and epilepsy and other nervous diseases, in paroxysms of tearing and rending pain, rheumatic and neuralgic. It is a pain subduer of much power. It is exceedingly valuable in diseases of women, in amenorrhea and dysmenorrhea, and as an oxytocic. I would also add to that it's famous for metrorrhagia and hemorrhagic tendencies, and it was used as a parturient, not as a partus prep, not in building up to labour, but as a parturient during labour. And that's why he said it was similar to ergot. So in that relaxing antispasmodic quality, then it can regulate the tenesimus, the spasms and contractions of the uterus to give birth to a safe baby. And in that sense of birth, then we have it as a herb that is birthing the spring as well, and birthing the hope again to the world in those ways, right? So, and here I have one of the things about mistletoe. Just look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That's so, so beautiful. That's a sprig of mistletoe that I put into this traditional Slovakian spirit that I brought back. And one of the things about it is you have to use it fresh or freshly dried. If you buy it dried from some herb supplier and it's been there for a whole bunch of time, it probably does nothing at all. It's a herb that's like that, has to be used fresh. But I share, I think and I feel that the medicine of mistletoe is not primarily in its use for headaches and spasms and things like this, because we can use cannabis, which is easier to obtain, and a range of other herbs. Even as its use as a parturient, they found it so helpful. There's a whole bunch of stuff by the eclectics in childbirth, right? I still don't think that's where its genius lies. I think its genius is in the lore. Its medicine is in the stories and the myths that I share with you. And in these dark days, sweet friend, these dark night of the soul and this endless winter of despair that the world feels like it's entering, like when will the light return? When will the hope return? And I think in these stories from our ancestors around mistletoe, as a place of peace, as a safe place, as a promise of the returning of the light, I think that's where the medicine is, and that's why I've focused upon that today. Take this lore and share it with your grandchildren.